Yo, I'm Jay Beershank. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. We're here for another edition of book reviews. We're at a temple here near my house, overlooking a nice view of the countryside there. We got some mountains in the back, some farmland, a small village. It's a beautiful spot. I never see anybody up here ever. It's really beautiful. I don't know why. There's a really nice cool staircase over there that goes all the way down to the road. It's pretty long. I had to run up it 2 or 3 times because I forgot my camera, and then I forgot my book, and then I forgot everything. So either way, got a nice workout, feel a little sweaty, and now we're here chilling. Today we have a book review for a great book. I'd recommend it to everyone, not just Americans, even though Americans may find it more poignant or more resonant. I think that if you dissect the book and really think about it, it's pretty resonant for anyone that travels abroad. It can also just be an interesting read even if you don't travel abroad, but you'd like to just get an idea of the ugly side of American diplomacy, or diplomacy in general, because you know, it talks a lot about other countries' influences as well, but primarily American diplomacy. That book is called The Ugly American, by 3 different authors, or by 2 different authors. Famous bestseller by William J. Lederer and Eugene Burdick. This is the cover. The book is here. It's a very old book. Not old, but this copy is old and tattered. It was written in late 1950s, I believe 1958, so almost 1960s. And it's the story of a few different men and women overseas in a country, a fictional country called Sarkhan, which is situated in Southeast Asia bordering Burma. It's a made-up country, and it starts off talking about kind of the hypocrisy of the leadership that's going on there, and kind of how these leaders are caring a lot more about social status within the country between each other, rather than actually trying to get to the bottom of what the country needs and trying to connect with the people of the country. And I think that that's a really poignant, important topic that we can come back to a lot for a bunch of different reasons that extend far outside of bureaucratic diplomacy and ambassadorial type things, but just in anybody who goes abroad. Because what the book talks about is basically all of the American ambassadors and senators and diplomats that are in Southeast Asia, one, don't speak the language of the country that they're in, so they need interpreters, which basically puts a huge barrier to start with for them to actually talk to any native people who can you know, tell them what they need and what the stresses are and what the country needs to grow. And I think that's really important, just because you know, well, it's a very real thing, as I live in Thailand right now, and I don't speak very much Thai, and I can't even imagine if my job was to give Thai people something that I think would help them without being able to actually talk to any of them. And another part of the diplomatic side of it was that even if they couldn't speak the language, it wouldn't matter much even if they did, because the people that they interact with are kind of like more of the high society educated class. But you know, a lot of what Southeast Asia was in the late 1950s and still today is farming people. You know, they're agricultural society. So talking to the educated people who can speak English in the big cities isn't necessarily going to give you a very clear picture of what the people of the country need. And I think that that was a theme that was returned to a lot in the book, about how it's kind of just more about everybody's trying to get money. It's a job for everybody. You know, there's senators that are sending money, and senators got to make sure that the money is going to the right causes, so then when they get there, the diplomats are trying to soothe over the senators to keep the money coming in, and then the military has a part in it because the military has certain agendas. And in this particular book, they're talking about communism. The Americans are anti-communist and the Russians are communist, and there's 2 different sides of that are trying to persuade these Southeast Asian nations one way or another. And it talked about how the Russians were much better at interpersonal communication and interpersonal relations, and able to sway the public much easier because they had people skills, I guess you could call it. They had people who could speak the language, and they knew about the small things that the locals needed much better than the Americans. And another part that I thought was interesting was that in the book they talked about how Southeast Asia loved the idea of America. They loved American ideals, but they didn't like any of the Americans that they found in Asia. And I think that that is such a poignant topic that you can think about in your personal life if you're someone who travels, because what I've found is a lot of people who end up traveling around outside of their home country, when they go to other countries, they have this freedom of animosity and this new kind of almost like privacy because of the fact that they're a foreigner. And they would do things and act in a certain way that would never be permissible to themselves if they were in their own country. And I think that that's something to really think about. And they talk about how these diplomats, you know, they go with the best of intentions, but then they end up living so lavishly, and they end up, you know, having this serious superiority complex compared to the locals. And when the whole point of why they're there is to best represent America and best represent how America can help these people of the nation, all the people, not just the diplomatic, bureaucratic, aristocratic people in the big cities. And that's a really great point, because you know, I think about that in like me here in Thailand. Like, everybody loves America, everybody loves the idea of America here in Thailand, but majority of people don't really like the idea of Falong, and Furlong is kind of like their word for it is their word for foreigner, and it's usually kind of used with a condescending, kind of like discriminatory tone. You know, Thai people would say, oh no, it's not mean, it's just how we say it, and you know, to some people it is, but for the most part, I mean, it seems pretty discriminatory. It's kind of like, you know, someone who's kind of just doing whatever they want, someone who doesn't respect our culture, and someone who's just here kind of like taking advantage and kind of just well, not taking advantage, but someone who's just here not really respecting anything and is just here because they can be, but we could never kind of do the, like, taking advantage of their privilege. How about that? So I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, because, you know, a lot of the people that you meet in these hostels when you go around the world and things like that, you know, they're not very good representatives of their country, right? And I'm not saying that they should be, but that kind of mindset that they talked about in the book with these ambassadors that are riding around in fucking Cadillacs and, you know, we're throwing these huge parties and always drinking and going crazy and having this lavish kind of lifestyle, and never really giving the people their time, because they kind of, you know, were above the working class people, even though they're there to accommodate the working class people, I think is something you can really think about. I try my best to, you know, be a man of the people out here, because in my opinion, it's like, you know, what I'm doing is taking advantage of my privilege. You know, I'm American, I can travel anywhere in the world, I can do anything I want. Thai person can't have that kind of privilege, so if I'm here, you know, I owe them a huge amount of respect and a huge amount of empathy and understanding and patience, and that wouldn't be exemplified very well if I was running around doing whatever the fuck I wanted. And I've been in that position, you know, when I was a kid, not a kid, 3 years ago, first time I went to Bangkok, I mean, I acted like a complete ass, because that was my idea of, you know, a foreign country. Ooh, go to Bangkok, go crazy. But, you know, as I grow older, I realized that that's not a good way to think. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting idea when they were talking to a local diplomat or a local government official or something like that, and he said, yeah, we love the idea of America, but the Americans you send here are so shitty, they're terrible diplomats, because, you know, they act that certain way. So I think that's a great thing to think about. Overall, I think it's a really great book. It's really poignant. It covers like a lot of different aspects of the situation. You know, it covers the aspect of propaganda that's displayed to Americans before they come overseas, talking about how it's like an adventure and a lavish life, and you can get to live in the tropics and make money and have a nice standard of living and everything. But they don't talk about the fact that, you know, it could be a war-torn country that has low standard of living and blah 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 blah, and is really stressful and difficult. They don't talk about that. They make it sound like it's going to be a, you know, a cool adventure or something like that. So that's an interesting part of it. They also talk about the governmental side, where sorry, the military side of it, where you know, they're giving billions of dollars in military aid, and they're fighting a war in this particular time where, like, they're sending tanks over, but they can't even use tanks in this muddy area. But they want the money to keep coming in because they're all being able to live a good life as generals there in the other country. Even though they're losing the war, they just kind of, you know, persist on. And that's an interesting thing too. kind of disconnected from that aspect of it. But last thing I'll say is I really liked the idea in the deception in the title, The Ugly American. What I always thought of this book, because I've heard of it for many years, but I never got my hands on it, but what I always thought the book would be, what the title referenced was like the idea that how Americans could be ugly in other countries. And yes, that is totally depicted through this book, but the ugly American, the actual ugly American in the book, ends up being actually one of the main heroes of the book, because he ends up being a guy who is physically ugly, but he's like a mechanic working man who goes out into the countryside and helps develop a rough pump so they can pump water into their rice fields, which ends up being a hugely beneficial thing to them, because it's a really laborious task, and some of these places, spend all day to get a little bit of water into the rice fields, but with the pump they could expedite that seriously, and it gives them industry. That's kind of what I was talking about before with like talking to the local people and figuring out what the people really need. And it was the idea that like all of the people in the Senate and all of the people who are diplomats and all of the people in America that are in the foreign country are telling the people what they need, and they think that they need huge projects like big dams over rivers, or new industrial complexes, or this kind of whatever it might be, these huge projects. But what the people out in the country really need, like what they talked about in the book, was like we send over 500 healthy, strong chickens to interbreed with their stock and to give them more eggs every year, be a huge help. Or to help them develop pump, give them an industry where they can build these pumps and have more water to increase their yield of rice and things like that. Like really simple things that can really, really make a huge difference, and give them basically like a strong independence before you try to start building. It's like trying to like build a skyscraper on a paper box or something, right? You got to have the strong foundation before you can implement these huge projects. But the government and the ambassadors from America just wanted to have these huge projects because they look good, and it pumped a shit ton of money into the project, and it looked really good to be able to say, look what we did for you guys. And it helps maybe a couple people who take some pictures with it in suits, but it doesn't help the people who are breaking their backs out in the field. So I really loved that aspect of it, because I really love the idea of like heartfelt leadership and genuine interaction with reality. I think that it's the most important thing in anybody's life, is just being able to have presence with things you do and the people that you're around. And that's kind of what this book, bounced back on every time, was just like, just need to be there and talk to the people and simply understand what's going on around you, rather than playing this kind of like illusory, I don't know if that's a word, like illusory game, which I think kind of is true for most of the developed world, right? It's kind of playing this illusory game where it's like the majority of the world is not playing this same game as you guys, but you think that the game you're playing is the most important one, but really it's just a fucking fallacy. That's maybe a little bit far out, but yeah, that's my opinion of the book. I think it's a great book. I'd check it out. It's really small. It's like 200 pages, quick read, entertaining, and it's always bounced into different aspects, so you never get bored of one thing. If one chapter is boring, the next chapter will be completely different, hit a new angle, so keeps you interesting. Yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate you watching. Peace out from a beautiful view here in Pua, Thailand. Look at that. It's remarkable. I love it. Looking a little smoky. I think they're going to start burning crops here pretty soon. It's going to get real smoky. But yep, that's that. Love you guys. Peace.